Hey guys, sorry I missed you. Let's go through everything so you don't miss a thing. Now, first heads up is today in class, we're going to make sure we go over our final two war poems for discussion. It'll be great. Next class, we're going to go ahead and we're going to discuss all of our war poems to prepare for our War Poetry Summative. And tomorrow, Wednesday, April 7th at 11:59 p.m. is the last day and the last time to submit your poetry summative for any credit as the last thing for quarter three. So, where have we been? Where are we going? Let's take a look. Last class, we continued our vocab study. We went ahead and we did our nonfiction book talks. You have nonfiction books ready to pick up. More info on that coming soon. We took a look at our last war poem, Dulce et Decorum Est, about a gas attack in the World War I trenches. And then we went ahead and turned in our poetry summative. This class, we're going to go ahead. We're going to take a look at some more vocab study. We're going to take a look at our last two war poems, Ballad of Birmingham and What Were They Like? And then we're going to do our poetry discussion formative. So let's hop right into vocab, shall we? So if we're thinking about vocab, remember, we've looked at a couple things. We've looked at vigil, which means to watch or observe. We've looked at anim, which means mind, will, or spirit. We've looked at the prefix dis, which means opposite of, differently, apart, or away. And last class, we even looked at patri, like the words patriot, patriarch, and compatriot. So, two more roots for today. The first root encompasses all of these pictures, and that root is sacri or sacri, which means holy. This is the holy, this is the Sacred Heart. This is an image depicting a sacrifice. This here is someone who is consecrating themselves, and unfortunately, this is a picture of desecrated Jewish grave markers in a graveyard. Our next root, and our last root for today, is actually luz or lume, which means light. So illuminate or lucid or, of course, bioluminescence all have to do with light. That's our vocab for today. We'll go over more vocab next class, but don't forget it, okay? Here we go, moving on. So let's dive back into war poetry for the time being, right? If we take a look through war poetry, one of the things to kind of keep in mind here, of course, is where we've come from. If you take a look where we've come from, our St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V from Shakespeare was about the 1415 Battle of Agincourt. And remember, the St. Crispin's Day speech was written well over 100 years after the battle, so of course, that's a lot of time to kind of, oopsies, sort of forget some details we know about that, right? And of course, the Charge of the Light Brigade by Tennyson, that was from the 1854 Battle of Balaclava, written about 6 weeks after the battle, based, Tennyson mostly, on newspaper accounts. Last but not least, of course, we have our poem from last class, Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. That was about World War I trench warfare and a gas attack. It was written by Owen, who is a soldier, who wrote it while recuperating from shell shock, which, of course, we now refer to as PTSD. So, if we take a look at the tone in St. Crispin's Day and the Charge of the Light Brigade, we're thinking about the tone in St. Crispin's Day. It's war is a glorious. It's a tone that says war is a way to be remembered, or a way to become brothers with the men you fight with, or of the king himself. When we're thinking about Charge of the Light Brigade, we're talking about how really war can be tragic, but it's still noble and a way to be remembered. So, a similar tone. But if you recall, last class, when we're thinking about Dulce et Decorum Est, the poem's very different. I want you to pause and think about it for a minute. Just pretend that you were Wilfred Owen for a minute. If you were Wilfred Owen, not you, but if you were Wilfred Owen, how would you complete this sentence? War is. How do you think Wilfred Owen would complete that sentence? Well, pause for a minute so that you can think about that. Think about that. How would Wilfred Owen complete that sentence? War is. Right? Probably wouldn't have many positive things to say about it. I mean, his last line of the poem says Dulce et Decorum Est pro patria mori, which translates roughly from Latin to it's noble and good to die for one's country. He called that the lie. Maybe one of the reasons why this poem was so different from our others is because, well, there's a lot of really intense detail and sensory language that really made it stand apart in a negative light. Maybe that's one reason. But in our war poetry unit, we've talked about a lot. We've talked about diction, which means word choice. We've talked about tone and mood, tone being the feeling in the writer or the speaker towards the subject, and mood is the feeling in the reader, the audience, when absorbing the material. Rhyme is those matching sounds at the end of words, and rhythm, again, is that pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables that creates a beat. We've taken a look at figurative language like a personification, hyperbole, simile, metaphor, alliteration, onomatopoeia, language that is used to go ahead and create vivid impressions using those comparisons between dissimilar things, right? And then, of course, last block we looked at sensory language and imagery, language that appeals to one or more of five of the senses. Today, we want to kind of focus on symbolism and irony, symbolism being the type of figurative language in which something concrete stands for an abstract idea. So, for example, if you said a heart represents love, a heart is something you can touch, love is an ethereal abstract idea. If you said a bald eagle represents freedom, bald eagle is a physical concrete thing that you can touch, freedom is just an idea. And of course, maybe the last one for another bird, a dove represents peace, a dove being a bird you can touch, and peace, of course, being something that's just an idea. We know that. But irony is new. Irony is the implication that the underlying truth is different from what's being presented. That's a lot of language just to say what happens is the exact opposite of what you'd expect in kind of a funny, inappropriate way, almost, right? But we're going to take a specific look today at dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that one or more of the characters don't. So think of it like in a horror movie or a slasher movie where you know where the killer is. You're the audience, but the character doesn't. Or at a surprise party where everyone waiting to surprise the person knows what's coming, but the person whose birthday it is has no idea. That's called dramatic irony, right? So if we shift gears a little bit, our three previous poems were about battles. Today we want to kind of focus on the impact of war and domestic terrorism on civilians. So if we take a look at our first poem, right, our first poem is The Ballad of Birmingham, written by Dudley Randall. It's originally published in 1965 in response to the bombing of a church in Alabama in 1963. We're also looking at the poem What Were They Like by Denise Levertov. This was published in 1967 during the height of the Vietnam War as a protest. So the war was still being waged while this poem was actually published. So if we take a look at the Ballad of Birmingham, what I want you to do right now is very simple. I want you to go ahead and click on the first link down below to go ahead and read the poem, and the second link to actually listen to it being read aloud to you. The first time that you listen to or read along with the poem, what I want you to pay very close attention to is I want you to listen for the way that Randall moves between dialogue, characters speaking with each other, and description to tell the story of the bombing. And I want you to be on the lookout for favorite lines. So let me go ahead and pause and let you do that now. You're going to go and click on the first link to read, the second link to listen. Be paying attention to the way that Dudley Randall uses dialogue and description to tell them the story of the bombing. Go ahead and do that now. Yeah, that's an intense one, right? So if we actually go back and we always look at poetry twice. An important thing to keep in mind when we read it again is to be thinking about what's ironic here. What is the opposite of what a reasonable person would expect? And be thinking, where do you know something that a character in the story doesn't? So where is a moment where you or another reasonable person would expect one thing, but the opposite happens? And what's something in the story that you know what's coming, but the characters don't? Go ahead and click on those two links again. The first link to read, the second link to go ahead and listen. Go ahead and pay attention to this again, but this time be looking for that irony. I'm going to pause so that you can go and take a look at that. Right. And it's that irony that really kind of adds another layer to the piece, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at the poem, What Were They Like? So again, the first link that you're going to go ahead and find here in the description, that's a link to the actual poem, What Were They Like? And the second link is a link to the read aloud to be able to listen to the poem, What Were They Like? The first time that you listen to or read along, I just want you to pay attention to the way that Denise Levertov, our poet, she uses two different speakers. One is a questioner, and another one is the person answering those questions to show the impact of the war on citizens in Vietnam. So right now, first link to go ahead and read, the second link to go ahead and listen. Go ahead and use those first two links. And as you're reading through and listening to the first time, just pay attention to the way that Denise Levertov uses this interview type approach with question and answer to be able to talk about the effect of the Vietnam War on Vietnamese citizens. Right? That's pretty intense too, right? But if we're going to do this, let's look at it one more time, because this time I really want you to pay attention to symbolism. This time I want you looking for what are some concrete objects in this story that could stand for or represent something different. So go back, use those first two links again. Use the third and fourth link, excuse me. The third link to go ahead and read along, the fourth link to listen, right, to what were they like. And this time, as you're reading along and listening again, I want you to look for concrete objects and be thinking, what ideas or what feelings or what abstract concepts could those concrete things represent? Go ahead and go. We're going to go ahead and pause. You pause too. Go ahead and listen and read along, thinking about symbolism one more time and what were they like. Excellent. And I mean, these poems are pretty intense, right? But I kind of wanna get your thought on them, right? So what I'd like to do, I'll go ahead and jump down here. I do want to make sure that we get a chance to go ahead and kind of hear your thoughts on them. So this part is the fifth and last link, and it's what I really want you to do. For this, I'm going to need you to go ahead and pretty simply put, all you're going to do is go ahead and tell me your name, your block, and tell me three things. What was your favorite poem, and why? What was the line that stood out to you and why? And last but not least, I do want to know some kind of insightful takeaway. It could be about tone, or it could be about mood, or figurative language, sensory language, could be about symbolism, could be about irony. But give me some kind of takeaways, that last sentence and two or more sentences, to kind of tell me about your thoughts on one of these poems. Let's go ahead and pause so you can take a look at that fifth link down here below in the description. Great. That's about it. So if you have questions, of course, go ahead and email me. Otherwise, good luck. You got this.